My name is Eric Zhao. I'm an assistant professor of management and entrepreneurship at the Kelley School of Business, Indiana University. Before joining Kelley, I got my PhD from the University of Alberta. And a lot of my research is focused on the notion of strategic paradoxes. By that I mean I study organizations that face difficult challenges, competing demands from multiple different stakeholders, and important trade-offs. So I have examined strategic paradoxes across a variety of different settings, including social enterprises like microfinance organizations, which strive to be both financially sustainable and socially responsible at the same time, as well as video game publishers, who produce and release optimally distinct video games compared with their competitors. So in terms of the theoretical perspective, I tend to draw on contemporary research in strategy and org theory to explain innovation and entrepreneurship related issues. The talk I'm going to give today is, it's part of my core identity, I would say, right? So I'm currently doing a research on optimal distinctiveness in the CSR practices among Chinese publicly listed companies. I got interested in this context because of a number of very intriguing observations regarding CSR practices in China. So CSR practices in China, as we know, it's a relatively more recent phenomenon compared with in Western countries. But it has really gained momentum in the past decade for two reasons, I would say. So the first reason is, as China is becoming increasingly integrated into the global economic system due to international trade or other types of, institutional participation, there is increasing imperative for Chinese firms to comply with these global social norms, right? And second, the Chinese government has shifted their focus, right? So from the pure economic growth to the broader notion of societal balance and harmony. So CSR have been promoted as a critical part of this new national development plan, right? So with this background, in the past decade, we have observed there's increasing imperative, for Chinese firms to adopt more extensive CSR practices, right? But at the same time, we also see a lot of, room for them to really customize their CSR practices, to design the CSR activities in a way that resonate with their resources, capabilities, so that they can really develop something unique, right? So what that means is we observe both the conforming and deviating actions in terms of the CSR practices among these publicly listed companies in China. So I think for scholars, this provides an excellent opportunity, right? So because on the one hand, it allows you to examine the heterogeneous CSR strategies across different firms. On the other hand, it provides a very ideal kind of context for us to test some of the questions in OD research, right? So you can basically observe both conforming and deviating actions in CSR simultaneously, and enabling us to examine, what are the drivers and underlying mechanisms which can really help us understand this variation, right? That paper was published in SMJ in 2017. It has attracted a lot of attention and spurred discussion since publication. So in that paper, I think we proposed several directions which we believe could, provide fruitful avenues for future research, right? So those mainly included questions related to OD on what, OD for who, and OD at what time point, right? So put it another way, think about we are basically encouraging studies on the multidimensionality of OD, the multiplicity of stakeholders, as well as the temporal dynamics of OD, right? So to our delight, a lot of the opportunities we propose in the paper have been gradually picked up by scholars in the past couple of years. there have been a lot of studies in this space. I personally would clarify them into two major streams. So the first stream of research normally takes a qualitative kind of approach, developing in-depth studies on single or multiple cases, right? So the focus of those studies have been on, really helping us understand the tension between the financial and social goals, right? So how that tension is perceived by these organizational leaders, how it is manifested in organizational structure, right? So a lot of the emphasis have been put on understanding the intra-organizational processes through which organizations can really, diffuse the tension, manage the conflict, navigate this complexity through various within organization mechanisms, right? So a second stream of research, I would say, also my work is a part of, it really go beyond this single or multiple cases to look at this broader databases, really helps understand this cross-organizational or even cross-national variation. Right? So my personal take on this is both streams of research are highly valuable, and they are in fact very complementary. Right? So my belief is a proliferation of approaches in terms of different perspectives, drawing on different databases, looking across different levels of analysis would be very critical for us to really have comprehensive and precise understanding of these chronic social problems like poverty. Yeah. Personally, I think by embracing these areas of tension, it can be a very powerful approach, especially for doctoral students and junior faculty, for them to first identify a research question and to start engaging in the conversation. Right? So of course, this can also be very challenging because you really need to, speak to different areas of research, to push yourself to read more broadly. And more importantly, you cannot just recognize the different opinions, but also really go beyond the surface differences to understand, what's really driving these divergent findings, right? So is it because they're drawing on different theoretical perspectives, or is it because they are making different assumptions, or is it because they are really, these different findings are really working through very different underlying mechanisms, right? But I think by embracing this kind of ambiguity, it can be very generative and enabling. Because there are two different camps of scholars, I would say, engaging in entrepreneurship research. One camp of scholars, basically they take entrepreneurship as a context, studying entrepreneurship phenomenon, but primarily drawing on theories from strategy, org theory, economic sociology. While the other camp of scholars, they really believe entrepreneurship should be developed as an independent field with its own theories. Right? So my personal perspective on this is I think we should encourage more explicit and direct conversation between the two camps. So I've been part of that effort. So for example, in the GBV paper I published with Mike Lonsbury, in that paper we're trying to introduce the institutional logics perspective to social entrepreneurship. That whole experience was really, really useful because as institutional scholars by training, of course, we understand how institutional scholars approach the whole idea of entrepreneurship. But in the process of review, we learn a lot from the editor as well as the reviewers, how entrepreneurship scholars approach the whole notion of institutions. So that makes me think, we have to build the bridges between these two camps, really encourage the two-way traffic in terms of the communication between these two camps if we really want to seriously advance entrepreneurship research. I would say, of course, first of all, publishing papers in leading journals and winning awards is certainly very pleasant and very encouraging experience. But part of the reason is I've been really fortunate to work with, great co-authors. I have had wonderful mentors when I was a doctoral student. And also, sometimes you also need very sympathetic editors and reviewers to make it happen. And beyond all these factors, there's also luck involved, right? So, after acknowledging all these factors, I think there are perhaps two pieces of advice I would give. So the first advice is to follow your passion and follow the trend. So follow the passion. I think this is a common piece of advice you hear many times, from the senior scholars. I think it's very useful. Only by discovering something you're really passionate about, you can keep yourself motivated, keep yourself energized, right? You can keep the momentum going. But I think simply by following the passion might not be enough. And for a lot of students, it may not be even very practical. So that's why, to follow the passion, I would add also follow the trend. So by that, I mean, really pay close attention to the frontier research happening around you, right? Try to start engaging the conversation and see what it can contribute, even as a doctoral student. And also stay tuned to the reward phenomenon you find most fascinating, right? So I can use myself as an example. So when I entered the PhD program in Alberta in 2010, so the whole conversation around institutional logics and institutional complexity has just started to gain steam. And I was really fortunate to be surrounded by very distinguished scholars who set as a foundation for those research topics. And also at the same time, the whole idea and phenomenon of microfinance has started to gain traction, right? So attracting a lot of attention from not just scholars, but also industry practitioners and policymakers, right? So this confluence of these different factors actually enabled me to bridge this contemporary research on institutional logics, institutional complexity to this microfinance context, which later became my dissertation, right? So, and the second piece of advice I would give is of course, to work hard and hope for the best. And so, at various stages of our career, there's different kind of setbacks you need to face. So when that happens, make sure you be confident, stay positive, and remain hopeful. Right? So because in America we say, hope is a good thing, right? So never a good thing dies. So ultimately you'll get there. Yeah. I think two things, right? So first is, of course, it's hard, right? So when you get rejection every single time, it's hard because you put so much effort and time in it. But always, if you really believe that's a good idea, you really believe that idea should be embraced by the scholarly community, by your field, you're really making a contribution, you should not give it up, right? So a lot of times I think the difference really comes from how persistent you are. Perseverance, right, makes a difference. So I think a lot of times it's not like the idea itself is really that bad. It's really, how much you are dedicated to the idea, how much patience you have, right? Again, there's a trade-off, right? So the clock is ticking, and you have to make the trade-off yourself, right? So I have been really confident in those ideas. I think that's part of the good attributes of being early stage scholar or PhD student, because you're fearless. Over time, you become more conservative, in fact. So, yeah, so it turned out to be really good for me. And the second thing is, every single time you get rejections, make sure you really take those reviews seriously, right? So I see not every single comment might be relevant, but a lot of times they're pretty useful if you seriously engage them.